Hello, everybody, and welcome to our conversation around why Black Lives Matter. We are talking today around how men of color can accept their divinity. And hello, everybody, and welcome to our conversation around why Black Lives Matter. We are talking today around how men of color can accept their divinity. Okay, so all of you are going to have, one of you is going to have to just keep an eye on the YouTube thing, because if I watch it, it projects both sounds. So as I was saying, we are going to talk around how men of color can accept their divinity. And I think it's a significant challenge just presented itself to us as we were trying to set up our live stream today. So one of the things that has happened is there seems to have been some technical changes across Zoom and Facebook. And I feel like the feeling for me that came up was the sense of not having a way out, or the sense of being unresourceful, or the sense of there's always something in the way of getting your good, and therefore being able to accept your divinity. And so one of the things that I feel like is probably quite a really good thing to just for all of us to feel into is just to, that space of where we are let down in our reality. And I'm going to say by extension, where we are let down in our reality by men of color. And I feel like that was it was a perfectly channeled challenge. So it's definitely an opportunity for us to heal. And I believe that it's going to probably help us quite significantly just to settle the energy and just to understand that we don't need to look to the outside for our source of power, for our source of good, for anything, but just that our reality reflects what's already happening on the inside. So there's obviously a feeling of unsupportedness, there's a feeling of unresourcefulness, there's a feeling of not being able, not deserving all that you have, and almost not being able to use what you have, because we have the technology, but we weren't able to use it to further our conversation around this topic. So I'm going to open it up to everybody and ask you how you're feeling about where we're at. Obviously, this means that we're going to be running a slightly late on this conversation. So it's also safe when you need to leave for you to be able to leave peacefully, because we know about the technical challenge. And then also to welcome our new member. So Diana, would you like to just give us a short intro of yourself? And then maybe you can start us off with what this new experience just brought up for you quickly.
Sure. Hi, everyone. So my name is Deanna Jackson. I am from the U.S. I currently live in Atlanta, Georgia, 26. And for me, this definitely resonates with me, especially the whole idea of like being let down by men of color, particularly Black men, because I grew up without a father for the earlier years of my life. My mom did marry, right? So I had a stepfather, but that foundational relationship was never there. So I definitely resonate with the whole energy of like feeling let down, and like not feeling like I can really depend on Black men specifically.
Yeah, and so if you feel into that space, what feeling does it bring up for you? Because I kind of feel like there is definitely a piece of healing for us here. And so I wanna just take you deeper into that space, and let's just heal this together.
Um, yeah, it's funny because I've been kind of working through this with my divine masculine, or who I feel is my divine masculine. And the conclusion I came to today is that exactly what I just said, like the foundational relationship isn't there. And I just feel, I kind of feel stuck. I don't know how to like bridge that gap, or if it even can be bridged, or like, should I just walk away and leave it where it is, or do I actually need the closure there?
Okay, so
So,
let's take a deep breath. And let's focus on very specifically the first feeling. Not the thought process, not the narrative around how it's played out, just that first feeling of where you're at in this space. And what is that feeling for you?
disappointment.
Mhm. And what is that disappointment stemming from?
Feeling like there's no hope there, there's no opportunity for reconciliation.
Mm. And so, where does your hope come from?
From God, from within.
Because God is your source. So, God is your source of hope. God is your source of peace. God is your source of a divine relationship blueprint in this space, right?
Right.
Right. So, can we make a new choice to release the blueprint of how we relate to divine feminines and masculines, and choose to accept God's blueprint for divine relationships in this space?
Yes.
And how does that feel?
That feels better. Yeah.
Because one of the things that I think is also useful is that it's okay to unlearn what we've learned. It's okay to understand that it no longer works for us and it no longer serves a purpose in our lives. And therefore, we can allow and receive God's way in this space. So, how do you feel about that?
That is a lot more freeing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like recognizing that I don't have to continue to tell myself the same narrative, that I can let that go and embrace God's narrative.
Absolutely. And God will guide you perfectly in terms of embracing or releasing what you need to release when the time comes. You
Right.
don't have to put yourself under the pressure of deciding completely what this is now. Where you're at right now, what you're experiencing right now is perfect for you. And so the one thing that kind of just also came up into my reality this week was everything is as it should be. And so if you allow that, you allow yourself to be in the moment. You allow yourself to be present. But you also allow yourself to receive what God's giving you, because you're not chasing something else.
Right.
Like, what would happen if you didn't think something was missing? What would happen if you didn't think something was wrong?
Yeah.
You would allow your peace to comfortably return. You would allow yourself to operate from that space of peace very peacefully, right? And so for me, the choice was to accept that everything is as it should be right now, and that God will perfectly guide the next step. And how does that feel?
Yeah, that feels good. It allows me to let go of the expectation, because I can see how the expectation is what was leading me to the disappointment and to the letdown. So yeah, that actually does feel a lot better.
Awesome. And so even in that space, can we just make the choice to, again, while we may love our DMs in our way, to allow God to be our source. Your DM is not your source.
Right.
And how does that feel?
It definitely takes the pressure off.
Mm.
Yeah, it does feel better. Yeah, that feels really good.
Does it feel complete?
Yes.
Awesome.
It does.
Would you like to just allow all that healing to integrate into your heart space and just to settle there and to know that it is safe there?
Yes.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. So yeah, like, and I think it's kind of been just a perfect journey of exploring the concept of, for me specifically, the surface of what the DM might be experiencing, given the reality of perceptions around him and the reality of life around him. And just like you said, that, taking off that pressure from all of us in our divine right, so that we can actually peacefully just be with God. So I want to open it up to everybody else and feel, and just ask them, how have you experienced this concept of the divine masculine of color, and what could potentially be some of the perceived challenges that you could identify in that space?
Well, recently we've been seeing a lot of, police brutality against men of color and like young men of color. And I think that's like, reflecting some stuff in our consciousness where like we've internalized that like men of color are like monsters. And it's our job to see past that and have compassion for divine masculine men of color, because like they've been really traumatized, and they are really hurt in this space, and probably have internalized this idea that they are monsters, which is not true. Like that's I think we've identified this before, where like men of color have like they don't feel enough, so then they leave or something, or it's not always the case, but like yeah, I think it's just about having a lot of compassion for them, holding a lot of space and just being really like patient as they're learning how to heal this part of themselves, because they've had to cope in a world where they're just always a target. And yeah, I'm experiencing this in my union in my own way. Like my twin flame has like experienced a lot of trauma from an early age, and struggles with expressing his emotions and vulnerability, and sometimes is like quick to anger, and it's you have to like see, like I have to see him for who he is. Like he's very hurt, and like a hurt little boy inside right in those moments. and he just needs a lot of love and compassion. Obviously, you don't want to, enable abuse as well, but it's about, having that compassion and seeing the divinity in them.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you've touched on quite an important concept here. And one of the things that we do need to remember and feel into is the concept that at the heart of it, we are all God's children. And at the heart of it, there's a child that has experienced certain ways of life, that has almost identified with certain things that may not be true of them as an individual. And so it is compassionate to extend that compassion to the heart of the divine masculine of color, or the divine masculine per se, because what you're seeing on the outside may not be the truth at the core of that person. And Kanisha, I kind of want to just speak to you in this space, because I know a few previous conversations you did mention how you'd also gone into the space of healing quite a few upsets with the divine masculine, and that led you to actually identifying your true twin flame. And I think some of that healing might be useful to just kind of orient us in this space as well, because I feel like there's a new layer of healing to this process. And part of the thing that I've identified is on the surface of it, we don't necessarily always look, but there is something on the surface, and then there's something deeper. And so I kind of just wanted to feel into whether you're comfortable to share your experience in having healed in this space.
Yeah, that's actually funny that you brought that up. So, I experienced not having my biological father in my life, who's African American. And so for the longest time, I really could not accept men of color. And as I really chose to heal through it, God had brought two men for me to like explore and see if they were my twin flame, both Black. And as I did this, I really learned who they were at the core, and understood that I just had this misperception due to what I learned from society, or what I thought was true about Black men. But as I really chose to see who they were at the core and their true divinity, I was able to really heal through that. And I thought that this was my block to my harmonious union, and that's why I wasn't in union with my twin flame, is because I couldn't accept him, and the fact that he was a Black man. But actually what had happened was God was showing me that if you can't actually love all of my children, including a man of color, you actually are not able to love your true divine masculine, whether or not he's Black or not. And my true twin flame has revealed himself, and he is not a Black man. But however, he had a lot of characteristics of the men that I had explored. And I'd realized that because I wasn't allowing myself to see past their color, I actually wasn't allowing myself to actually know them truthfully and who they were. And so God really helped me work through my upset of looking just at the surface, looking at, like you could say, a cover of a book, and really asking of me to bring acceptance and a lot of love and compassion, and to just love his children as they are. And really being able to see that the divine masculine, they're one divine masculine, divine being, really. And to be able to really heal and learn, and to see that, okay, like I have upset with this man, but really it's not with this man, it's with the divine masculine, it's with the energy of the divine masculine. And God is showing me in different areas how to really heal through all of that, so I can just love the divine masculine as he is and accept him as he is, instead of how he shows up on the surface. And so, yeah, he really, God really asked me to be very vulnerable and to really get past my fears of feeling like I couldn't trust a Black man. But what I learned is that it's actually really false. And what I also learned was that a lot of them would show up in a certain way because they felt like that's how society viewed them. So they're like, all right, oh, I might as well just show up this way because that's how they already expect me to show up. And so just showing up out of expectation instead of showing up in their true divine power, and really allowing themselves to heal through that, really allowing themselves to know that they have God, and that they are safe to show up as their divine selves and really be truly who God created them to be, whether they're Black or not. And so, yeah, it really, one of the things that I really had to come to terms with was like, I also realized that I would feel really guilty at times, that like I made comments before, like, I will never date a Black man, I don't trust them, da da da. And so I had a really big block to love, is really what it was. And God had me work through a really deep fear, and really work through a false perception that I had, a big lie that I was allowing myself to believe in. And through that, I really feel that I now give myself the space to really get to know anyone who comes into my space, no matter what they look like or what their background is or whatever. It's really helped me just open my eyes to unconditional love, and to see everyone as a divine child, instead of, like I said, how they show up on the surface.
Thank you for sharing that with us. And yeah, you know, like when you talk to it, I do feel like there's possibly something that I can heal around this, you know, this surface perception of kind of projecting bad experiences are based in relation to childhood, in relation to men of color, onto all men of color. So it's like, you know, like just like the minute, and I think it's a sense of this mold. And I almost have this view of men of color just fit into this mold. And so when you spoke to just actually seeing past the illusion of the surface level of the book cover, I was like, there's something there for me to heal. Because it is about the book cover, right? And the one thing that I appreciated was you saying, well, actually, it's one divine masculine. There may be in various forms, various colors, but it's still a divine masculine, right? It is God's divine masculine form.
Yep. And I had also came to that realization too. It just helped me ground it deeper. But I am a huge fan of Grey's Anatomy, and I love that Shonda Rhimes is always bringing stuff into her shows that are so relevant to what we're working through, like right now in the world. And one of the things that came up was we have there's a new Black doctor on in the show, and he's driving home, and of course he's this really high-end doctor, and he's in kind of one of the southern states, and so he's driving back from somewhere to go back to Seattle, and he's on the phone with his girlfriend, who's also Black, and of course both his hands are on the steering wheel, but he's pulled over, and he like tells her like, I gotta go, I'm being pulled over, and she asked him to keep the phone on so she could hear what's happening. And so these two officers pull up, one's white and one's actually Hispanic, but they have a dog with them. And the white officer asked him to turn off his phone. He's like, I need you to turn off your phone. And so he's like, okay. So he turns off his phone. And of course, like, that's been asked before, like, I don't want to be videotaped. I need you to turn off your phone type thing. And so at the end, like, he didn't get arrested or anything, but they did like take everything out of his car and like go through his entire car because he is a Black man. And so not knowing like anything about this man, like if it would have been anyone else, it probably would have just been fine or whatever, but they literally like emptied out his entire car on the side of the road. And the Black man was just like, he was like so distraught and so upset because he's like, I didn't do anything. He was like, they just did it because I'm Black. And so it's like that sort of like, you have no idea that this man is a high-end doctor, has like no background, no nothing, but just because of his color, they chose to treat him in that way, as if he was a monster, as if he was going to harm someone. They were just digging and trying to find something, and there's nothing. And so that too is just like, wow, like how many times have I, because of one experience, have I really chose to project that upset onto men of color without actually allowing the truth to come, allowing space for the truth to be revealed, really. I just fed into the lie and stuck with it. And so it really required me to have deep forgiveness, not only towards myself, but also asking the divine masculine, like within myself, I just asked like for forgiveness for holding on to that for so long, for allowing myself to believe in that lie for so long. And as I've personally done that, my biological father has reached out more in the last couple of weeks to me just to communicate and talk. But also it's really allowed a lot of healing within the divine masculines within my life, to be very more intimate and vulnerable with me, to really allow us to go deeper in our relationships, whether it's my brother or my father. But yeah, just really understanding that like altogether, the divine masculine has a really deep hurt about the perception of how they're supposed to show up, instead of just being loved and received as they are.
I really resonate with what you're saying right now, obviously, as a divine masculine, even though I'm not one of color. I get really freaking triggered in the open forum when women talk about how like horrible men are.
Yep.
And they talk about how like the divine masculine, like, and it's interesting, like, you know, I get it. There's this like constant thought, like the toxic masculinity, or they talk about how just men are horrible and abusive and all this stuff. And like, sure, like I get it. The world has painted that picture. You know, there's been some pretty really horrible things that, you know, men have, you know, done. Right. And so, you know, we use that to perpetuate the story. Yeah, for me, like I always have to like go into that space of, you know, that story, and how I feel about that story, and claim my divinity in that space, and knowing that I'm, you know, I'm not evil, I'm not inherently bad, that I am of love, I am of God, and you know, not choose that, right? Because yeah, there are going to be men out there that choose that behavior, right? Because, you know, one of the things that like came up for me too as we were working through technical difficulties was this overall feeling, like I was like holding on to this feeling of like, God damn it, this is so hard. Like, can I figure a solution out or what? Like, it feels like I have to put so much energy in to find a simple solution, to just heal, to just have this time and space to like have this opportunity. And it felt like it almost like a defeated feeling of like, well, damn it, like no one wants to see me. And I was even pulling cards before, and I was like, one of the cards I had pulled was like being seen, and like claiming being seen. And I think the masculine, sometimes it's like it's hard because they're being seen as every other thing other than their divine self, and they're trying and they're trying and they're trying and everything possible that they can try to, you know, just be seen as not that. But yeah, it's about claiming claiming your divinity, the masculine, right? And then everybody seeing the divinity in your masculine. I think, you know, we talked about this last week with the bullying and the conversation there, like of recognizing that, like, you know, the healing happens when both parties see that they are divine, right? And so, like, you know, it starts with the it starts with divine masculine seeing that he's divine, and you know, also continues with the divine feminine seeing his divinity. And yeah, like I just I really I feel for the divine masculine of color, and I think it's interesting that there's, you know, divine in our community even, and in this group there's no divine masculine men of color. And you know, that I would like to call that in. I would love for us to be able to have a space that feels warm and welcoming, where a man of color can come here, can feel welcomed, can feel like their divinity is seen.
Also,
Right?
that the divinity is safe in this space.
Yes.
So one of the things that also, and it's in line with what you've just been speaking about, is, you know, after our group chat around the sense that there aren't quite there's not many men of color in our group, in our community. One of the things that started happening was I saw more men of color actually commenting on other people's posts or asking questions. I was like, oh, wow, snap, like just like that. I was like, you know what? Maybe it's just also time for us to look at what's right in front of us. So, and then that was one of the things that I had to also just heal through with my coaches, is because I do have a tendency to look deeper quickly. And so I tend to not necessarily focus on what's actually at the surface. And sometimes the surface stuff are just as significant as the deep stuff. And the one thing that I've kind of had to heal through in this last week was just my you know, like my almost warped perception of men of color. And based on experiences, I kind of had this perception that men of color are not necessarily sophisticated, and not necessarily smart, and not necessarily capable of meeting me where I'm at, and all of those kind of things. And at the same time, all of those things also appeared in men in color in my career and all of those kind of things. But because of the significant filter I was carrying, I wasn't allowing in evidence that says anything different. And that's why it's very useful to be aware of your triggers and your upsets, and also to be astute enough to look when you're being called to look at something. Because literally when I looked at this warped perception of men of color, I just realized that there's probably significantly more evidence to contradict that. But I wasn't allowing in this evidence because the view was blinkered. And I think that's part of our challenge as humanity and society, and even to an extent, possibly DFs of color and DMs that are white, is that we tend to have a blinkered view because we have had experiences that haven't left a good taste in our mouth. And one of the things that always needs, it always comes back to me, is that you're not your experience. You've been able to learn through your experience. You may have learned some lessons that you may need to unlearn, but you've also learned some very significant lessons that you do not have to unlearn, that you can actually comfortably and peacefully share, that are good. You are not your bad experience, but you can heal and learn from that experience. And so this kind of dichotomy of the two sides of actually one coin, and it's one side of a coin where I was only seeing half of the coin because I wasn't allowing evidence of the other half of the coin, is such a thing. And it's like, it's just like, it's just peaceful, because I can relax into my reality and go, well, actually, no, I don't have to paint every single man of color with the same messy gray brush. It's not necessary. I choose to allow into my reality evidence that men of color live in their divinity and claim their divinity and show up in their divinity.
Amen. That's awesome. This has reminded me of a trend I'm seeing on TikTok lately, where there's a sound that women are using that's like, I hate all men, and then there's an exception, and it's just like, I don't know if you guys have seen that, but it's just I think the divine feminine's job here is to let go of resentments towards men, that's how you get your twin flame.
Amen. And to peacefully hold space. And I think one of the things that actually happened to me quite early in my twin flame journey and my ascension journey was the concept of holding space and understanding the concept of holding space. And so people misinterpret that. And one of the things I realized that was the person that at the time, the person who I thought was my twin flame, I was explaining this concept of holding space. And he was like, for me. And I was like, well, not quite for you. I'm holding space so that you understand that you are safe and you are loved. But I'm not waiting for you in any way, kind of thing. And I think that's the concept that we need to, that we just need to kind of also share with people, that holding space doesn't mean waiting to exhale. It's not a Whitney Houston movie. Holding space is to allow that person to be themselves and you be yourselves in peace. And heal what you can heal and release what you need to release and leave when you need to leave. That's also holding space. And sometimes that holding space needs to extend to you first. In fact, most times it needs to extend to ourselves first. We kind of need to hold space for ourselves. We have not grown up, I don't think I grew up being taught that it is safe to say, I love you, but I don't like this thing, and I don't like that thing. And your behavior is not in alignment with how I want to be treated. And so if you can't even hold space for yourself in that way, how could you possibly hold space for anybody else in that way? So it has been quite a profound lesson for me just to understand what holding space actually means. And it's almost the extension of compassion. And there can be no compassion if you are not included in the equation. So how are you all feeling?
Well, the whole masculine stuff has gotten me feeling my feelings for sure. Yeah, I just I think like you're right on the money when it's like, to feel safe to be like who you are, if that makes sense. I think that like, like I knew we were going to be talking about this dialogue, and God was showing me stuff and showed me, I told you guys earlier, like a book Why Don't Big Boys Cry? It's a new book that just came out from an African American man. I think he like was a football player at Ohio State or something like that. Like he's, a very like, big muscly kind of guy, right? Someone who people would think like, oh, you don't have like emotions or feelings, right? That's like the big thing that they talk about with men. I haven't read the book that he wrote. It's a children's book, but it brought up a lot of things for me as to how I've perceived men my entire upbringing, as well, and as coming into my masculinity where I had resistance because I thought that I had to not feel my feelings or numb out in order to be a man. Feeling into all of that, it's so amazing to have that safe space. It's, definitely, held down and created by your divine feminine to be able to feel your feelings and to be yourself and to claim your divinity. There's so much online about how men are liked by women if they don't have feelings or if they seem strong or things like that. You're not strong if you feel your feelings or whatever. And I think it's just this perpetuation of men, don't look at yourself as divine and you will be accepted. And I think that because your divinity is in your feelings, right? That's how you communicate with God. It's how you communicate, recognize yourself and deepen your own peace. And so through holding that all in, you just kind of you become a shell of yourself. And I think that because of this sort of perpetuation we've created of men being the protector, which there is an energy of that, by having that, where there's this large responsibility that the divine masculine has taken on in that way, especially men of color who were protecting their women and their families during slavery and the Civil War and things like that, where they had to give their own life or take beatings for their children or their wives because of it. And so it's like this feeling of like I have to protect them, and so therefore I can't be happy. I can't claim my divinity. I can't feel my feelings, because if I show that, then it might make everybody cry and be upset and be scared and not feel protected. And so I feel like the divine masculinity, especially the one of color, I feel like has taken on this like needing to be source for their family, and in interim ends up like abandoning themselves and abandoning their families because of that. And feeling the burden, like I can't carry this burden anymore, I have to leave. Right. And yeah, claiming your own divinity would be, hey, God's got, my brother, my sister, my mom, my dad, everybody's taken care of. I'm not responsible. I can just feel my feelings and receive from God here. I can just be taken care of. I don't need to be the protector here. And I think that's maybe an energy that we can even go deeper in, around like the protector. And I think that's really what, when I think of an African American man, I think of like, the big guy at clubs. I think of a protector, somebody who's like, that energy, and like that's just, feeling into all of that. That's a heavy burden to feel like you're responsible for that.
Yeah, and I don't know what you guys call them in the States, but in South Africa we call them bouncers. I don't know, and it's a ridiculous term, but it's always going to be, majority of the time, it's always going to be the biggest muscled oak, regardless of color. But generally, it's men of color.
It's
But it's always the
Usually,
biggest
exactly.
muscled oak that's like
Yeah.
having that kind of stands a head and shoulders above everybody else there, so that they can kind of survey the land and ensure
Yes.
that there's no
Yes.
problems. And so,
Yes.
yeah, you know, it's just that embodiment of the expectation of taking on the source or God energy.
Right, because you have to be the tough guy.
Mm.
Right, like even thinking about you know, in the States, and I don't know if it's like this in any other country, in the States specifically, you know, we have, you know, the big area Compton, and also in New York, Brooklyn and things like that, where there are gangs of African Americans and also Latinos, which are part of the men of color, right? You know, and these gangs are set up as source of protection, and you usually will join a gang because you want to not only feel protected yourself in the area and the neighborhood you live in, but also you want your family to feel protected. And there's not a lot of choices and options you have but to join this gang. And in that gang, there's a lot around feeling like you have to, you know, you can't show emotion there. You can't do all those kinds of things. So yeah, like I think that there's certainly something here deeper to heal around you know, men of color feeling like they have to be the protector, the source, and having that heavy burden.
Yeah, and I think it is a very heavy energy, but I also just, you know, just through our conversation up until this point, I also feel like almost that mantle or carrying that cloak of heaviness just has lifted to an extent just due to the fact that we kind of bringing greater awareness into space. And so I feel like it's a good place for us to end this week and to continue this exact conversation next week, because it's just such an extensive conversation, and I think there's a lot of healing to be had here. And definitely what's really worked well was also just kind of, you know, Ray, just you giving us the divine masculine perspective of saying, well, it still feels freaking heavy. You know, there's heaviness. And
Listen,
and
we feel
let's be
heavy
honest,
even from not men of
you know,
color, regular men.
it's that energy of Atlas holding up the world, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the energy that men and divine masculines have almost kind of had to kind of embody when it's not necessarily their responsibility.
Oh yeah, it even speaks to the white men of America and the feeling that they have to like take care of the whole country, and then they end up fucking up the country anyway. Like it's you think you're doing something good because you want to be the man, you want to be the protector, you want to be the papa bear, but you're actually really harming everyone because you're not seeing their own divinity, because you're not really seeing your own. Yeah.
Yeah, so absolutely, I do believe that this is a topic that we can go deeper with.
Amen.
And so, yeah, I feel like it's a good place to end today, and I think it's also gonna just allow us to integrate quite a bit of the healing that we've had today, because it has been it's kind of been a little bit of a roller coaster. You know, like at the beginning, and it's settled and it feels very peaceful. So I'm very happy with where we got to today with this topic. And I am looking forward to continuing the conversation next week.
Me too.
So yeah, thank you everybody for joining us. And yes, please, if you happen to watch this video, please like and subscribe to our Church of Union YouTube channel, where you will find all our previous discussions around why Black Lives Matter. And we look forward to seeing all of you next week for another healing piece of work.
All right.
Awesome.
Bye, guys.
Everybody. Bye-bye.